Hi, this is Swapnil Bharti and we are here at DockerCon in San Francisco, and today we have Ali with us. So tell us about your company and what are you doing here at DockerCon?
Yeah, so StackRox has been around for 3 years now. The company is about 50 people. And what we build is we build a full products lifecycle security solution for containerized microservices environments. So we have a single platform that covers various aspects of the build and deploy phase, as well as a module that covers runtime security for containers and microservices. So we try to create a kind of a holistic overview of the entire process.
As the container adoption is really going into production nowadays, so what are the real challenges that you are seeing in terms of security?
Yeah. I think the main two challenges we see up front are really the fundamental problems you see with any emerging market, especially when it comes to a virtualized sector. One of them being you need to understand and manage kind of hygiene and assets as you're going through your entire build and deployment process. So that's really the area of the focus that a lot of the customers have, just the nature of the market being early. And the other part of it is really everybody wants visibility into their entities, whether it be at the build and deploy or whether it be at the runtime phase. So I think the market is maturing very quickly. As you mentioned, we're seeing an adoption and uptake of containerization, more push around consolidation around orchestration, which is allowing customers to do more sophisticated things. As a result of that expertise and sophistication, we're going to see, and we are starting to see, a higher trend towards more and more sophisticated security at runtime. But right now, the focus tends to be around that good hygiene around build and deploy and good visibility at runtime.
And that is the focus of StackRox as well?
Yes. We do really have a heavy focus on detection-centric view of the world as well. So our product is a distributed set of sensors that runs on a company's environment, continuously collects data, applies then into a central analytics environment, machine learning, and then correlation to give you actions and automated responses. So our view is that you really need to cover it for the full life cycle. So while we do focus on the hygiene at the build and deploy process with our prevent module, we have our detection and response module, which is really covering applications at runtime that are containerized.
When you say company's environment, what does that mean?
Meaning that if you run as a company in a private data center, hybrid public cloud, we don't necessarily sit like a traditional AV in every container and then run the same rules and heuristics, just kind of replicate the container. Our model is to continuously collect data from every node and application and then centralize it and make a much larger correlated decision. So rather than raising single alerts every time something pops up, we put them together, stitch them for you, and then automate the response. The main reason is our goal is to reduce as much as possible the human requirements from an intervention standpoint.
And it really doesn't matter where it's running, right?
No.
Right.
That's the beauty of containers, right? We're all containerized ourselves, so we can run on any premises that the company runs.
Right. Do you only, when you say containers, today every container or microservice, I don't know how you want to call it, so do you only target Docker customers, or you also go beyond that? No,
so we're trying to address the entire cloud native ecosystem. Container is just another form factor, and that's where we started. Quite frankly, we see security as having to be form factor agnostic. So whether it's Docker or whether it's the evolution of the roadmap towards things like OCI, whether it ends up being covering Kubernetes or Mesos or Swarm at the orchestration layer, our view of it is that this whole new stack needs an entirely new approach, and you need to understand the relationships between these pieces. How is Kubernetes impacting the container? How is container changing the behavior of the application? So our product is really an agnostic, and the reason we talk about it being kind of a sensor model versus an agent that kind of conducts actions is we need to capture all this information and see how it correlates across your entire infrastructure. So it's really beyond containers. It's about the cloud native profile that you're trying to build.
What exactly is cloud native?
Cloud native, yeah. So the way I think about cloud native is more around some core principles. That's how I think about it from a differentiation standpoint. And I think there's a huge debate, but the way I think about it is one cloud native profile or particular principle is try to reduce the host as much as possible, reduce permissions and packages and credentials and privileges, but rely on your orchestrator. Like the orchestrator in a cloud native world, I see as the API-driven operating system. Building everything down to its atomic units of compute, so swapping and continuous build becomes an easier process. And the overarching umbrella that I see that is kind of a driving principle around cloud native is really automation. You're trying to do more with less people, and I think those are the core principles we see. Whether you do it in a VM or in a public cloud or in a private cloud, I think it's more about what you aspire your business to be and how you're trying to build IT infrastructure to support that.
The reason I ask you because different people have different definitions. So despite being technology, it's more like art, a poem that different people have their own interpretation of what it is. So it's always interesting to see other different people's perspective, what they think, and it makes perfect sense in different use cases. When we do talk about microservices and cloud native, these days it's hard to keep up with the buzzwords. Serverless is a new. So what kind of security implications are there in the serverless landscape?
Serverless presents its own unique set of challenges because naturally there isn't a lot you can do with it on the host side of things because it's a function that's basically writing. So this is where I think, if you think about what our product is trying to do, which is the full product lifecycle, not just focusing on runtime. Because more and more constructs in IT are becoming either ephemeral or as services needed on kind of use case basis, you have to be able to provide as much of that security, hygiene, and visibility upfront in the build and deploy process. So that's where we focus on and say, well, if you're building, for example, a Lambda function, you still have to be able to write some code, you still have to be able to write an image that eventually gets translated into a serverless model. There's a lot of things you can do that leads up to the point before you operationalize that function. Now, the truth of the matter is that you can't do a lot with serverless at runtime phases from a host standpoint. So this is why you have to upload as much as your work process as possible into the build and deploy process.
Right. What is the story behind the name StackRox?
The StackRox, so there's two components to it. One, when we were building the product, and it actually comes back to one of your questions, which was, is it about a container? We wanted to build a full stack solution. So how do you secure this full cloud native stack? So we wanted to make the use of the word stack in the name. And then we wanted to convey, solidification, stability, stability, things like that. And so we decided to go with rock, stack, rock. But we decided that ROX, R-O-X, was a little bit more, catchy. We can do a little bit more with it, and just kind of rolled off the tongue.
Yeah, and it's
so
funny,
a solid stack.
Yeah. Because I was thinking that some rock stars will be walking over. Actually, it's StackRox. So
maybe we'll come to that for a marketing campaign.
So I got some basics about the company, some basic concerns around security, not only in the existing market, but also when we look at future, which is serverless. Anything else you would like to touch upon before I move to the next phase?
No, I think the biggest part of it for us right now is really the market is now going from its very kind of infancy stage into a high maturity stage. So we're just trying to engage with customers as much as possible. So the biggest part of it for us is really the exciting part of the roadmaps that we have coming up in the product. And I would say it kind of further validates the full lifecycle product and really a distributed architecture necessary. Those are really the main parts.
Right. How much of your technology is open source?
So we built the company intentionally to deal with, global 2000 companies, regulated industries, companies who strive to build cloud native, but they may not have the same luxuries. So we actually don't have an open source component of our product. We tend to be a more kind of security-focused, security-centric product. We've done talks, for example, at B-sides and different environments where we, develop and release tools to help configure, RBAC for Kubernetes and contribute back to the ecosystem. But our product is inherently not an open source tool.
Yeah, I have talked to whenever I talk to security, I get the same answer because it's a different market also. Let's start talking about technology and let's start talking Docker. Let's talk about you for a while. Okay. So when you're not securing all these things, what do you do in your free time?
Securing different things. So my background is I was always been kind of heavily involved in security. I got kicked out of school for hacking my university departments and crashing them. Then I got sucked into the intelligence community. So I was basically a hacker for government. Then my last company was another security company that I founded. So my passion happened to have kind of merged with what my work looks like day-to-day basis. So even in my spare time, if I'm not doing something geeky around security, I would say the only kind of tangential thing that is relevant is probably I'm really, really into astrophysics, but that sounds even more geeky, I think.
That's fun. Yeah. So when you do talk about security, what do you think about Mr. Robot?
I stopped watching Mr. Robot after the first season.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
After that, it lost the kind of...
I also felt like it wasn't really kind of like... It wasn't the practical stuff I had to deal with day to day. That is like the very pretty, very exciting picture that everybody draws in security. But I think when you come down to the reality of day to day, it's really the frustrating, mundane things that everybody has to do.
Right.
And I think just living that day to day made it a little bit more difficult to watch Mr. Robot.
Right. Have you seen Black Mirror?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
When I think things are going wrong at my startup, I watch a few episodes of Black Mirror and I just feel generally better about my life because I think it's just very dark and gloomy.
No, the reason I'm asking is that because I'm a science fiction writer as well,
Okay.
and you mentioned machine learning, artificial intelligence. So the word we are moving towards,
It is.
And you guys are actually building that same word.
Yeah.
So, do you think that is a bleak possibility, or is just far-fetched fiction? And she's thinking that what is going on here?
I think it's kind of an interesting conversation. So I think the conversation of AI is actually a very valid one. I personally don't believe we have even functional AI,
Right.
let alone like general holistic AI. Like generalistic AI doesn't exist. So I think, my rule of thumb has always been that if you want to figure out if somebody's really talking about machine learning and AI, just substitute the word for computer. If the word still makes sense in
At
that
this
context,
point, it's very primitive.
It is. For
Yeah.
us, we use machine learning because we have to make decisions on massive volumes of data at machine speed with very little context that a human can absorb. It has to be automated.
Right.
So machine learning for us makes sense because it's about large-scale data analytics and correlation. I think the trajectory towards AI is a very realistic one. I think naturally the uptake in GPU kind of optimization and a lot of the things that's happening around neural nets and deep learning is going to contribute to that. Some of the areas that I'm a big fan of is like sub and super modular optimization for feature engineering on like edge points. But I think there is another tipping point we need to go through before it becomes a valid one. And I think where it's suffering right now is more of an inherent problem the security industry has. Is the security industry is not fundamentally built around sharing data.
Right.
And if you think about where AI feeds, is about data and knowledge and curation of that, like junk in, junk out. So if the security industry comes together as a whole, like parses data, filters it, creates good indicators, good data, clean data, and then collaboratively puts this together, then there's a huge amount of kind of value you can add. But this is where I think other environments like image recognition or self-driving cars actually have a huge advantage because there is mass public volumes of data available to be able to train models on top of.
I mean, even if you look at machine learning and all those things, there are frameworks which are open source, but the data is,
proprietary.
I think Linux Foundation came up with a new project called Linux Foundation Machine Learning, where they do have, I think Project Akumas or something like that.
I can't remember the name, but I think you're right. Yeah.
Because they have some models also there. Because model is what,
Yes.
So this is one effort that I'm aware of. Are you aware of any efforts by the industry where, players are working together?
I'm aware of particular initiatives that are subsets of companies and sectors doing it together. Like at a particular time, Palo Alto Networks and Symantec and a few others came up with a security initiative. There's a lot of really great security work, even open sourcing it, that is happening between companies like Google and Docker and Airbnb and Netflix of the world. But I'm not aware of any large-scale collaborative initiative that is meant to create open data for the purposes of training, because I think most companies, especially in security, realize that the data becomes the proprietary piece for them. That's actually the part that creates a differentiator for them. Like if you think about our machine learning, the reason we took the architectural decision we made was we wanted to collect 100 times more data and analyze it than our competitors. That's why we built our architecture the way we did. So we want to feed a lot more data to our ML model to train it in a lot more substantial fashion and a higher efficacy. So data is valuable, but it's very expensive. Doing it in a company's environment is very difficult, and you have to balance that with a lot of other things. So when somebody like us goes through that process, I think it kind of naturally creates this like protective sense of the data because you went through such trouble to get it.
But how is that the mindset change? Because I have been covering open source for the day one, and now when I see everybody's doing open source, that mindset has changed. So do you see any patterns or any signals where the mindset of the security companies will also change?
Definitely. And I think actually to your point, the emergence of the kind of the cloud native initiative that has pulled a lot more of the open source initiatives into the kind of the mission critical infrastructure of a company has forced security teams and just generally security organizations to change a lot of their models of how they used to do things. They have to be a little bit more open, more collaborative, decision making at a faster pace, more comfortable with new tools. So naturally, they can't make those decisions in their own bubbles anymore. They have to collaborate. They have to get additional information. So I think that general movement is very much in its infancy. It's definitely happening. But this is to your point where I think there's more need for industry framework and constructs and some scaffolding that helps accelerate that.
Right. And while we're talking about Black Mirror, I see all those things as IoT, because they have implants. And IoT is also becoming very, very big these days. And with that, all those security risks is bigger because a lot of processing is moving to the edge. So from your perspective, what is going on in there in terms of security?
So I think from a standpoint of pure IoT and edge-based computing, I actually see the problem as 2 points. And this is something we think about longer term, because when we were saying we're not focusing on containers, like our core mission long term is securing distributed systems. Right. And IoT is really at the end of that.
And these days you cannot, isolate, when you talk about...
It's just some workload that is running on some node and it's talking to each other. Yeah. Right. So my view of it is there's 2 components to that. IoT, by the nature of it, is a massive data production unit. I mean, it's exponentially higher volumes of data you have to produce. So you can't, the same way you couldn't take traditional security solutions and apply them to containerization and microservices, you still can't take that information and that construct from microservices and containers and purely apply to IoT. And what I mean by that is that there's a certain classes of attacks that we've seen on IoT, whether it be DDoS or particular hijacking or exploits that are taken advantage of, that still do require some preventative or some potential detection mechanisms. But the larger problem I think that needs to be solved in IoT is how do you control the production of the data itself? Like, can you actually measure the value of what this device is supposed to add to a particular user? And is 100% of the data that is being generated about that user relevant? Or is there a particular way that you should create a control for a user to actually reduce and diminish that? Now, that's not something that's in the purview of StackRox. That's not what we're doing right now. That's just kind of my personal opinion. But I think it just requires a fundamental change as to how you approach it, which is more around data production than data control.
Right. Yeah. That's. So I think we kind of covered a lot,
Yeah, I know.
We jumped on the science fiction and then moved back
Black Mirror, back to enterprise.
So do you think anything else? I mean, we can sit whole day and we can talk whole day, but
I'm sure you have better things to do than sit with me the whole day as well.
Yeah.
No, I think that's it. The biggest things I would say that has been taken away for us is that customers are finally investing heavily into this ecosystem. I think Docker did a tremendous thing pioneering this. I think there's a lot of other companies doing really great stuff, like Red Hat, like Google. They're really pushing the initiatives forward. We're seeing kind of the adoption of Kubernetes in the ecosystem. I think if you asked a lot of us a year ago what concerns you, is like, there was half a dozen different orchestrators and schedulers, and that consolidation is creating a much more stable roadmap for companies like us. So I think more and more every year we come here, it's just a more encouraging story we hear, and we're really optimistic about the size of this market and what it's building.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for talking to me
today. Yeah, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
See you again at the next conference.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.